evening and welcome. The host has stopped my video, apparently. Thanks, Sasha. Well, good evening and welcome to We Got Planning News for You. Charlie Banner here from Keating Chambers. And we are... Let me see if I get my video to work. Here we are. No, you can't see me. Anyway, well, that's probably a sign. They also had a face for radio. But we are delighted to be back today to discuss the planning infrastructure bill that came out this week with none other than Victoria Hills, the CEO of the RTPI, who I'll be introducing in a moment. Before I do, can I encourage our viewers to make the usual donation to charity in lieu of registration fee if you feel so inclined. And this week we are particularly encouraging our viewers to consider making a donation to the St John's Hospice, Lancaster and Bowel Cancer UK. There's a link to that charity on our website and also on the YouTube and other means of pre-recorded broadcast of our show. That's in memory of our dear friend Jonathan Easton KC, who recently passed, a friend and inspiration both to us and so many of you in the planning sector, and the hospice looked after him recently. So we do strongly encourage you to make a donation to them this week. Now, with that in mind, let's introduce Victoria. Victoria, hello. Can I ask you the usual questions? Where are you calling us from? What, if anything, you're drinking this evening? And tell us more about how your week. Because I know you had an exciting one.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me this evening. I'm actually an hour ahead of you. So I'm in Cannes in the south of France. I've been at Berlin this week, flying the flag for planning UK, Ireland, globally. I am the odd one out down here because I'm drinking Diet Coke. So I'm having an excellent week, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that. I might be looking sunburnt. See my complexion. I can assure you, all we've had today is rain and cold weather. So I'm afraid not too much sun down in the south of France.
Hopefully that will change soon, Victoria. Well, we're really, really excited to be discussing the planning infrastructure bill and more with you in the second half of the show. Interview led by Thea. We're going to mix around the order today. So rather than do the news first, Paul's going to do a sort of summary of the infrastructure bill in 3 minutes. Very easy to do, I'm sure, after we've done the case reports, and then that'll lead into the interview after that. I'm not in Nipim, not in the south of France. I'm in my mum's house because I have been this week at the South Worcestershire examination in public concerning Worcestershire Parkway and other proposed allocations. Hence, I am drinking Worcestershire cider. My mum lives in Worcestershire, hence which is where I was raised. Hence, I'm staying with her this week. You're never too old to get your shirt ironed and be cooked for. And I had the pleasure of sitting next to a certain Mr. Chris Young and being on the same side as him and sitting opposite Thea Osmund-Smith. So three of us have been all together. We were relatively well behaved. In no way did we send each other rude messages in the course of the examination and try and make each other laugh. And it was great fun. And Thea, are you back? Where are you now?
Yes, back home in Shropshire and drinking champagne.
Very good.
You go, taking it out of a bottle which I've just opened because it's Thursday.
Why not?
And I won an appeal in Hinckley today for the third time of asking, site that should have gone through years ago, but there we are. And also in honour, of course, of Victoria appearing this evening and not having a theme on this week's episode. So I went with France. And, of course, champagne fits that perfectly.
Fantastic. Chris, where have you got? You seem to be in a sleeper trade.
Yeah. That's the Bristol Suspension Bridge, which will tell you that we're in a hotel that you and I go to quite a bit.
Oh, yes, the Lake Tree.
That is explaining, doesn't it? We often have to come to North Somerset, and there's a rather nice hotel here in North Somerset.
The floor numbers don't match up on the floors.
Yeah, so this week I've had 2 inquiries and an EIP, and that is quite an exhausting schedule, I'll be honest with you. I'm with Catherine Bentham, and we're doing an inquiry for Persimmon. Me and Charlie just take it in turns, basically, don't we?
It's been great fun. Sasha, you seem to be in the sauna.
I'm not that far from Victoria, but I'm about 300 miles north in Courchevel, so we've had the same weather but here it's been snow. But I've just had the remarkable thing of watching my horse finish 6th at Cheltenham. So I've given up seeing my horse make his debut at Cheltenham. I had the champagne ready to blow open if we won, but unfortunately it has to wait for another day.
Unlucky. I was turning it to sausages. And Paul, you're in virtual MIPIM.
Well, I thought I'd celebrate the fact that I thought everybody else would be in MIPIM by putting a virtual MIPIM behind me, but I'm actually. Oh no, I've got rid of the green screen and nothing's changed. I still.
So you are
The grand reveal has failed. No, so I'm currently up in the northeast of England, so it's thoroughly miserable, and I haven't been at 2 inquiries. I haven't been in EIP because my middle son gets married on Saturday, which I'm looking forward to enormously. And I did ask my wife if she'd get me an appropriate beer, and she got me that. Mr. Bounty. Very sweet. I think it's absolutely lovely, which I shall drink later on. So thank you for coming on again, Victoria. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the radical changes to the planning system, all of which look like potentially the right direction. But I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thanks, Paul. Well, now in a neat segue, we're going to go from the beach in the south of France to a motorway service area in Tatton. And Sasha, you're going to tell us all about that.
I am. I don't know if Rob's got the case to put up. Yes, he does. Of course, he'll work his magic. See, we now get cases put up, unlike when in the early days when I was in charge of IT, and I was told by all of you constantly how poor I was at it, which I accepted because it was fair. Yes, I think this is a really important case. This is one of Mr. Tucker's. And this relates to that long stretch of the M56 where you think, I need a break. And what was proposed by the Tatton estate, as I understand it, was this motorway service area, plus, as you can see, a hotel, obviously a PFS, etc., various EV charging points. And noteworthy, called in by Gove in last year under Section 77, so a true, authentic call-in. And I think this case is really important because, well, it's important for two things, because we're in the nice world where, as you can see, the Minister for State for Housing and Planning actually endorsed the inspector's view, Mr. David Rose, who I think might be coming close, and he can correct us, but he might be the longest serving inspector on the rota currently. I'm going to make a suggestion that he potentially is, frankly. But Paul appeared in front of him for the appellants, and I think there's some really important conclusions here from the Secretary of State in the form of the Minister of State. And the first is the key points is the need was indisputable for an MSA because it greatly reduced the significant gaps that currently exist on that part of the network. Secondly, there was no realistic prospect of an alternative site, which is quite a powerful conclusion. Thirdly, that there would be material safety and welfare benefits. The HGV facilities and the hotel facilities would also have significant benefits. I thought what was quite powerful, particularly the eternal debate, which we always have, which Charlie knows very well, about what weight does the MPPF require economic benefits to be given, one of his great hobby horses. But in this case, the Secretary of State clearly concluded substantial weight to economic benefits, also materially, which most of us modestly accept, in social benefits, moderate. But in that I noticed the Minister accepted significant weight to the social benefits. Now, what I haven't revealed yet, and I should, is it's a Greenbelt site in the old scale. But it was subsequently, there was a debate about Greybelt, and the Minister for Housing concluded that effectively it was appropriately to be considered Greybelt. So I think that's a very powerful decision. And let's not beat around the bush. The effect of purposes A, B, and C, and strongly affect those purposes, is absolutely huge. It's arguably, and Victoria will like this, but I think it's arguably probably as big a change in the planning system as we've all seen in our professional careers, that there is now this category created of appropriate development within the Greenbelt, which hugely widens those that can be considered grey belt. And actually, unlike a lot of policy changes, is materially being activated, implemented on the ground as we speak. So here we have an MSA as appropriate development, notwithstanding the Greenbelt designation. And that, frankly, folks, is a pretty significant game changer. I think it's last thing I would say is, in terms of the harms, they were clearly, like the public benefits and the heritage impacts that were alleged, all overcome by effectively the public benefits and the benefits that I've said. So well done to Paul's team, a fabulous victory, and you must have all been delighted. And as I say, a really powerful decision of the implementation of grey belt across the country. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks. Thanks, Sasha. Thea, pour yourself another glass of champagne, because not only have you won a big appeal today, but I'm about to talk about another one of your successes. So you're clearly on a roll, and that concerns a decision in relation to a solar farm on a site known as Land by Castleview Road. It's in Melton Borough Council, to the southeast of a village called Botsford. The inspector, Richard Clegg, recommended that the appeal should be allowed, and the Secretary of State agreed. The first point of perhaps some significance and interest is that on the benefits of the scheme, the inspector had given separate weight, on the one hand, to the general broad support the national local policy provided to proposals for generation of renewable energy, but separate to that and the early contribution that the proposal would make to generation from renewable sources and energy security. The Secretary of State didn't agree with, though he agreed with the overall conclusion, though it was Pennycook who actually made the decision, held that paragraph 168A of the framework, which states that significant weight should be given to, quote, the benefits associated with renewable and low carbon energy generation and a proposal's contribution to a net zero future, that encapsulated the various things that the inspector said should be given separate weight. So there's one overall collective weight to the renewable energy, low carbon benefits, as opposed to each aspect of them getting separate weight. But that didn't matter, because the weight given ultimately proved to be sufficient to justify the grant of permission anyway. But an interesting point, potentially of wider application for cases. Then Inspector and Secretary of State went on to hold that there were landscape adverse effects of moderate major to major, and even though it wasn't a valued landscape, nonetheless those effects carried significant weight. There were visual effects also that were judged to be harmful, and collectively those landscape and visual effects meant there were breaches of both a local plan and a neighbourhood plan. There was less than substantial harm to a range of heritage assets, including 2 at Grade 1, Belvoir Castle, and a local church. There was also harm to the Belvoir RPG and a registered park and garden, the conservation area, and a Grade 2 star listed church. None of that harm was particularly higher order, but nonetheless a collective series of less than substantial harms, including to heritage assets of the highest order. And there was consequent conflict, so the Secretary of State found, with local and neighbourhood plan policies in this regard too, and they obviously were given great weight in line with the MPPF and statute. But in the overall conclusions, the Secretary of State held that though there was conflict with several local plan and neighbourhood plan policies relating to landscape and heritage, the proposal drew support from the specific policy in the local plan, which set a criteria-based assessment for consideration of schemes such as this. And as such, because it passed those criteria, the proposal was in accordance with the development plan as a whole. And that's quite a good illustration of the sometimes overlooked or downplayed principle that you can conflict with quite a lot of development plan policy and still be in accordance with the plan as a whole. So quite a good illustration of that point too. The public benefits outweighed the heritage harms, therefore under statute and the MPPF, the less than substantial harm was justified and the appeal was allowed. So well done, Thea. Glass raised to you.
Thanks very much, Ellie. I'll have to correct you, though. It's Beaver Castle. You'll have Leicestershire later.
It's it. Sorry, forgive me. I am from Birmingham, so I can't pronounce anything. How on earth does that pronounce Beaver? Goodness, anyway, you'll have to...
Yeah, that's one, I'm afraid.
Yes. Well, I stand corrected. Now, Chris, you're going to take us to Balsall Common.
I am. Somebody's observed that Paul is so excited he appears to be on fire. There's a barbecue, boy.
No, it's Sasha's in the sauna down below. So steam's rising.
Steam's coming up.
You've got Sasha buried under the patio, is what you're saying.
Just dry.
All right. So Balsall Common, we bring this case up. It is a proposal for 95 dwellings. And as you can see, Inspector Susan Hayward was making the decision and she decided to allow the appeal. Why is this case interesting? Because it's about green belt and grey belt and very special circumstances and how the three things interact. I've got a few images provided by Donna Savage, who was the planning consultant in charge of this proposal. There you can see it's an edge of settlement location. Balsall Common is in Solihull district, and that's the site. We go to the next image. Looks like a housing site because it is a housing site, so it's got houses on it. And then if we look at the visual images as well, the next image, look, who wouldn't want to live there? That looks nice, doesn't it? Nice development. And this is obviously a full permission because they've got all the details of the scheme and included 9 self-build plots as well. Now, the reason there's lots of different issues that were raised by the council, but what I'm really interested in is the greenbelt aspect of this. So if we go to the actual text of the decision, 82, the inspector says, in accordance with the framework, inappropriate development shouldn't be approved unless very special circumstances are raised. So this is being run as a very special circumstance case. Next paragraph tells us that the inspector concluded that the development would cause limited harm to the openness of the greenbelt. You could see there how it had built development largely on 2 sides, and to the 2 purposes of including land in the greenbelt, together with the harm by reason of inappropriateness. I give that substantial weight, which we know you have to do because of the MPPF. None of the other matters assessed above weighs against the proposal. So a whole list of complaints, but none of them were against the proposal. And on the other hand, there are a number of benefits which weigh in favour of the scheme. So you can see which way this one's going already. We go to the next paragraph. This is an area where there's a very great need for additional housing, including affordable housing, due to the severe affordability problems in the borough. Nice to see this language being used. I have to say, sometimes you make all these points and, it's just said, well, there's affordable housing shortfall. Severe affordability problems. It's likely to be a number of years before sites would be allocated in the local plan. To meet the current and pressing need, the development of housing in these circumstances attracts substantial weight. The amount of affordable attracts significant weight, and together those benefits clearly outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. So just relying on the housing and the affordable housing. Now think about that, because we had a ministerial statement from the Conservative era where they said unmet housing need would not normally amount to very special circumstances. And here we have a very different conclusion on a housing proposal, ignoring in effect what those statements had said back in about 2015. Next paragraph. Paragraph 156, the inspector then looks at, sets out that major housing proposals should make certain contributions referred to as the golden rules, and a requirement for affordable housing, contribute to necessary infrastructure and relate to access to good quality green spaces. The inspector considers that, and we go on to the next paragraph. As set out earlier in this decision, the development would provide the necessary affordable housing. So the 50%, it would contribute to the necessary local infrastructure, and good quality open space would be provided on the site. You remember the site plan, there wasn't a huge amount of open space there, but met all of the golden rules. The development would therefore comply with them. But the overall conclusion, paragraph 87, Paragraph 158 of the framework states that significant weight in favour should be given to such development. However, I've already given substantial weight to the provision of housing, having regard to the particular circumstances of the case, and any significant weight to the affordable housing. And significant weight. I've concluded the very special circumstances do exist. Accordingly, it's not necessary for me to give additional weight as a result of compliance with the golden rules, as it would not lead to a different conclusion. So you meet the golden rules, but the inspector was satisfied already on the basis of the very special circumstances, which of course included 50% affordable housing. So 2 routes to the outcome. The inspector considered both, but relied on very special circumstances, reminding us that very special circumstances remains a route to a permission, even if you're not grey belt. Finally, then, in terms of the appearances, well done to Robert Walton for his success there. Robert does lots of work in the green belt, and well done to Donna Savage and her team for a very successful green belt outcome. We're seeing lots of these, aren't we?
Cheers, Chris. Absolutely. Now, Paul, you're going to tell us about the planning infrastructure bill in a few minutes' time. A few minutes.
In 3 minutes, starting
3 minutes.
from
Now.
Go. Right, so this is probably the most significant piece of legislation that's been introduced into Parliament in our field for a number of years. Introduced for its first reading on the 11th of March by the Secretary of State, with the express intention to create the biggest building boom in a generation. And it aims to address some of the well-recognised problems in the planning system. Number 1, planning fees, hypothecation, which is a lawyer's word for ring fencing of planning fees, to address the gross underfunding and the lack of services in the public sector. It's now seeking to identify full cost recovery of the cost of a planning application for the processing of the application and for bringing in technical specialisation. It will be subject to regulations. It won't include plan making and enforcement, and the Secretary of State can intervene if the fee is too high. But there is no suggestion at the moment that the power which exists for the planning inspectorate to charge for appeals should be exercised. Note to government. Secondly, planning committees. Problem is the over-politicisation of the planning process and stalling obviously beneficial applications like allocations, which seem to take up a huge amount of our time. So the focus is for planning committees to go to complex and more contentious decision-making upon which there is real requirement for democratic oversight. So the regulations will be introduced under this power to ensure smaller planning committees for greater use of delegation and for committee members to have mandatory training as a precondition to make planning decisions. It will be astonishing to members of the public that they don't already. And we are promised a national scheme of delegation to have consistency of decision-making. Brilliant. Next, strategic planning. I hear the cheer going up from my audience. Finally, the daft expression of devolving everything down to the lowest level of local governance and giving little strategic direction appears to have been accepted to have been a complete failure and resulted in the meltdown of the planning system for the last 2 decades. It may have made us a nice living, but it's not in the public interest. Well, hurrah, this bill will restore strategic planning. Devil's in the detail, but there will be jointly prepared strategic development strategies. The burden will be on combined authorities, combined county authorities, mayoral and non-mayoral authorities, all covered by a strategic planning board. The devil will be in the detail, but it's back. They will create SDSs, which will be able to set development requirements such as housing figures and employment figures, hopefully, but not actually introduce allocations, but can identify broad areas of growth. SDSs will have policies and reason justifications and will be subject to examination. Please, why do we have to examine the reason justification? Let's just do the policies, please. And will be tested by examination and hopefully with some elements that perhaps in guidance may be presumptively sound. For example, if you go to the local housing need or higher, so we don't have to waste our time doing that. Next, item number 4, NSIPs. There is going to be a faster and quicker approach taken in relation to NSIPs by reducing the pre-app stages for consultation, the thing that terrifies those who look at the difference in the planning system and the non-planning system. I wonder how many 49.9 megawatt schemes have been kicked around over the last few years. NSIPs are going to be revised every 5 years, and the Secretary of State will be able to direct some projects to go back into the planning system from the NSIP system. Hurrah! And hilariously, there's something called the Banner Review, which I've never heard of. Apparently, that's some of those elements are going to speed up judicial review. That's obviously some sort of spoof. Is it April the 1st yet? Never mind. And then 5th issue, there's some miscellaneous points. There's going to be simplification of CPO. Why can't we have a consolidated CPO bill? Why can't we have a consolidated planning act? But there's going to be the power to remove hope value, for example, for parish council-led CPOs, so as to create affordable housing and social housing. Hurrah! That's what neighbourhood planning should really have been about in the first place. And that will potentially assist high-value areas such as Cornwall, where there is a recognised need to bring forward such development by communities. Hurrah! There's going to be greater flexibility for development corporations to produce development on greenfield or brownfield land. For energy infrastructure, there's going to be a power which will allow those most affected by energy infrastructure, such as pylons, to gain some financial benefit. Now, we've always shied away from that and said, oh, it's bribing the planning system. No, it's not. Every other country in Europe does it. Those who are disproportionately affected by things in the public interest, frankly, should benefit in a greater way from those who are less proportionately affected. There is also an issue about replacing the first come, first served approach with regard to grid connection, which does cause problems down the line. But I do ask, as a plea from my clients in relation to those sort of projects, please have regard to the appeal process when implementing that. There's going to be a nature recovery issue where Natural England will be creating environmental development plans for specific types of developments for specific geographical areas. And if they've got one in place, then you won't need to do other than to pay whatever the levy is that's within the environmental development plan. I think this is the neutrality element, though it's not specifically stated. And it will also, apparently, according to today's news, encompass the power to CPO land to do this. That really could be game-changing. We'll have a job by the end of this. So overall, a lot of change at a time when the UK needs stability and growth, but most of it seems to be in the right direction. A huge emphasis on delivery, but I do add a couple of words of caution. Please speak to people like Victoria. Please speak to those who are on the front line of delivery of these things. And I stress that, given that it took 6 months to produce the version of MPPF, and it could have taken 1 day to have withdrawn all the Gove amendments, just as we withdrew the Eric Pickles deprecation of onshore wind farm. And then can I finally just say, can we have a single consolidated planning act in due course? Because that would be great, because at the moment it's starting to get a bit daft. And then in other news, Secretary of State has also announced consultation on reducing the number and extent of statutory consultees. Sports England, Theatres Trust and Garden Trust are already in the firing line. Huge amount of sense of that. Hopefully that will be accompanied by some funding of stat consultees so they can actually do their job properly. And similarly, I do note that the much promised PPGs on some of the elements that we were told just after Christmas we're still awaited. I checked about an hour ago. We're still awaiting flood risk and viability. It would be quite handy to have that, if at all possible. That, Charlie, is this week's news.
What a superb summary, Paul. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm sure many people find that invaluable. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Thea to more fully introduce Victoria and get her take on all of this. And of course, can I kind of encourage viewers as well, please do, those who are watching the live show, ask any questions in the Q&A or the chat function. So Thea, over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And hello, Victoria. Thank you so much for coming on the show again. I watched the first episode where you appeared on Have We Got Planning News for You? And that was in July 2020. So it was sort of in the midst of COVID. Chris was doing a virtual inquiry. His hair was so big, it'd taken on a life of its own. Charlie, I don't know why you're laughing. Yours was shoulder length. And funnily enough, Paul gave a summary of the proposed planning reforms and said, please, can we have a consolidated planning act? Because it's all getting rather confusing. And here we are in 2025. And Victoria, I'd like to talk to you about planning reform, if I may, especially having gone on today to look at the explanatory notes and seen that they're almost as long as the bill itself. So I'm hoping that you could shed some light, certainly on what's useful and what's not useful.
Yes. Well, I mean, firstly, thank you very much for having me back. Great to be here.
No, it's our pleasure. It's absolutely our pleasure. And I don't think really you needed any further introduction. So I'm going to dive straight in and ask you this, that you had some key legislative asks ahead of the bill coming out. And I'd like you, if you can, please, to explain what those were and the extent to which the bill meets those asks and expectations that you had.
Well, thank you. And yes, what a week it's been. Well done, Paul. As you can imagine, there's been a lot of talk on all of this, where I am at the moment. And I will have a go at answering your question succinctly. The list wasn't as long as perhaps it may have been because some things had already moved forward a little bit on strategic planning. So we had really 4 big things that we wanted to see in this bill. And I would refer all of the viewers to our Planning Reform Hub on the rtpi.org.uk website. It's all there along with our blogs, our detailed responses, because I know some of the viewers are, of course, self-declared planning anoraks, planning nerds, you name it. We all love planning. There's a lot of them out here as well. So there's a load of detail there. I'll summarise the 4. But before I do, I just want to pay tribute to not only my own team back at in the RTPI, but also the members across the regions who sit on our English Policy Committee who have helped us to go through all of this at pace. Because we've had 13 or 14 consultations this year, which is more than we had in an entire year last year already. So we are moving, we're moving quickly. So in no particular order, as we are today, speaking down the line, we've got a government who's big on digital, big on AI, and yet we still do not have a requirement for planning committees to be held virtually. So we do feel there's a bit of a left hand and a right hand going on here. We can't be the world's leading advocate on AI if we can't enable our communities to join planning committees virtually. So we would like that one, and we've been very clear, having that as a mandatory requirement for hybrid committees would be really rather helpful, not least for accessibility, but we actually think it might help drive some better behaviours because there would be that level of scrutiny as well. And that's really important when we're talking about these sorts of matters for the community. And just on the community, often when we speak to them, I'm sure it's the same for you, there's a bit of a mystery as to what is planning about, what's it for. We'd really like to see a purpose for planning legislated. We've managed to get this into legislation in Scotland. I think it's really helpful because it puts down a marker as to what is the purpose of planning. Why are we bothering with any of this? What are we trying to achieve? And I think that's a really important thing that we would like to see in legislation. And then sort of moving to broader policy, and I think we'll come back to this. It would be really helpful if we could join the dots on certain big national pieces. So if you think we have national infrastructure strategy, we've got local growth plans, we've now got a national land use framework, and we'll have a national industrial strategy and a few other bits and pieces, no doubt. Wouldn't it be wonderful to draw that all into a national spatial plan at that macro level so that the other levels can sort of slot in underneath? We could all save a lot of time and effort if we had that clarity nationally. So we would like to see a national spatial strategy. And of course, who's going to make all of this happen? Well, we feel a statutory chief planning officer should be really part of the mix here. That is, again, something that we've been able to get in legislation in Scotland. And so that was in our key ask. So those are the top 4. They're statutory chief planners, a spatial plan nationally. We would like communities to have better engagement through virtual committees. And we would like a purpose of planning, because this is really important stuff. So those are those top 4, if that's a useful starting point.
That's really useful. And I want to go to your joining the dots point, because we've heard about the provisions on spatial development strategies, and how do they differ from the RTPI's call for a national spatial framework, and how successful do you think they can be?
Well, I mean, it's all part of the ecosystem. So we're very fortunate. We've got the local plans. We've heard a bit about those. We've now got these regional, spatial regional level coming forward in a way that Paul very eloquently described better than I'm doing right now. But actually, that's this citywide, city region level is a really interesting one and very much a hot topic here, because the mayors are out here in force and they're all talking about what they're going to be doing. I won't name mayors, but I've had a chat with at least one of them who's very excited about all of this, what it means for his region. So I think it complements it. So you of course, we're not going to set sort of big allocations in a national strategy, but there are certain things that it would be very helpful to know at a national level that then guided those regional plans that then filter down to the local. So the idea is to be complementary. We've seen it work in other nations. And we think that, if you've got a government who's really clear on investment and growth, it's really absolutely essential. And my last point is it helps to join up the government departments so we don't have competing strategies working in different lanes, blissfully unaware of what the other one's trying to achieve. And the way I describe it to lay people is think about the London Plan. That is an umbrella statutory document that all of the other strategies sit underneath. It was really helpful. So economic development, culture, skills, also housing, everything sits underneath the London Plan. So if you could have a version of the London Plan, lighter touch, sort of nationally, then we could all be sort of joined up with that industrial piece, the growth piece, as well as health, education, infrastructure.
So it's all about joined up thinking.
Well, that's what planners do. We're quite good at doing that, but we just need those tools to do it. I know you did ask me what we didn't get in. I don't know if we want to return to that now. And we
can do that. Let's deal with what it didn't do first, and then I'll ask you to talk about the positives.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the starting point is, by the way, it's been a very good week for planning in England. I had my briefing, luckily, with the chief planner on the train down here on Monday afternoon. It was a bit crowded in the buffet car, but I did nearly fall off my seat a couple of times when she told me what was going to be in there. We weren't drinking champagne there, but we could have been, because I was super excited to hear some of these things that we've been advocating for many, many years, with many people telling us politely to go away. So, it really is great to see that, so many things. The big one for me was the ring fencing of fees. So many times that was a no. Strategic planning, of course, we knew coming. Great stuff on the NSIPs. Development corporations, as you know, I'm a fan. The committees is a very interesting one. I think we're going to come back to. But there were a few bits and pieces in there that were missing. And it is relevant for this new scheme of delegation for committees and decision making. Because I just want to be clear for the listeners here. We were not advocating for a new national scheme of delegation for planning committees. That wasn't on our asks. But what we've said to government and will continue to say is, if you want to change the way that the decisions are taken locally, if you want to move more of those decisions away from committees and you want to give them to our members, to chartered town planners, I think, but we'll hear if not from the questions, I think our members are up for that. But we need a statutory wraparound, please. We want a statutory post in local government, because that's quite a big change in the way we're doing things. And so that post has got to be elevated in status, but also it has to be competency-based. So it needs to be a statutory chief planner. It's got to be competency-based. And so we will continue through this process as the bill passes through various houses and becomes an act. We'll continue to make that case, as we will for the purpose of planning and for our national spatial strategy. But I don't want that to do down the fact that actually we have had a very good week here. And just to give you a snippet, I'm in a very international environment here. The UK here, but so's the rest of Europe, Middle East, America's here. And actually the conversation on planning in the UK has fundamentally shifted this week. I have been coming to MIPIM now for a decade. Every time I've come here, planning doesn't always get the best press, I'll be honest with you. It's been a bit of a lonely place, and that's why it was clear that the Royal Town Planning Institute needed to be here, because we will be talked about, but we need to be part of the conversation. And it has had a fundamental shift already, that the government is clear about resolving some of those issues in planning. They want to see investment in planning. They think it's really key to the growth strategy. And, that has been incredibly helpful. I've just been talking with investors this afternoon. There is no shortage of appetite to invest in London. But some of those investors are talking about going to Spain. They're talking about going elsewhere. It's a lot easier to invest. So this has been a really important moment that we need to unlock some of those issues in a fair and balanced way. We think it's a really, really important start, but there are still some niggles there to go. We'll continue to raise those, but the conversation, just to share a little anecdote, and you'll hear this from other people who've attended, it's moved away from planning being a problem. And sorry for those people who work for this organisation I'm going to mention now. It's the building safety regulator that's now the issue. So everybody's happy. Planning's now sorted. Just, that things move quickly. Planning's okay now. And actually the issue now is the gateway process. So I'm just putting that on the agenda in case there might be someone you want to invite to a future discussion about how they're going to fix it.
One of the things I did want to talk to you about, because you've been particularly vocal about this, is the funding shortfall for local planning authority development management services. And we know that it's enormous based on the most recent figures, but going back some way, there's been cuts over a number of years. And the bill does go some way, I think, as you've already said, to addressing that issue with increasing fees and ring fencing those for the purposes of development management services. Does it go far enough, given the potential additional burdens on local planning authorities with things like spatial development strategies?
Yes, I should have said in our kind of longer narrative on asks, we've made it very clear that any new burdens need to be funded. We have had situations quite recently where either the department or near-side departments come up with very well thought about initiatives, but they're not being funded properly, and that places extra burdens. So we're very clear that any new burdens would need to be funded. I think the ring fencing for fees cannot be underestimated as a significant shift. And that's gone down very well with the development community here, who we all know were always happy to pay money as long as they could see the service they were getting for it. But of course, it is only the start, because planning isn't just about development management. We've got the production of local plans. And of course, many of those combined authorities or new growth areas are going to be involved in the business of having to produce new documents, which are quite serious ones. So there is a question mark as to how that's all going to be funded and coming forward. And I think those authorities are keeping a very close eye on spending review territory. But so that will go some way to address the resourcing, which is has always been the biggest issue in terms of turning things around quick enough and reducing delays. But I think what we want to see, and we've been very clear with the department on this, is a long-term resourcing and capacity strategy. There's been a few bits and pieces here and there. We've certainly been involved in working with the department on apprenticeships. I don't want to labour the point on level 7 apprenticeships, but I will just say, if we've got 70% of apprentices who are in local government, if the tap gets turned off on that levy, that is going to be a serious problem in local government. I'm on the record of making that point in the select committee 2 weeks ago, so I won't labour it, but I've made it again. We must keep funding organisations, great organisations like Public Practice, who are doing great work at bringing more people into local government. Also, the department's pathway to planning, completely oversubscribed. We do a lot more of that. What we've been successful at doing is to leverage in private money. Aviva are out here, of course, looking for opportunities, but they also have their ESG funding, which they've committed to our new scholarships programme, working with the British Chamber of Commerce, which will bring in additional 100 planners over the next 3 years. We're certainly helping them to fundraise to grow that more. So it's a no stone unturned approach. It's apprenticeships, it's bursaries, it's scholarships, it's pathways, it's public practice, it's fees. The scale of the challenge is such that it needs all of that. So it's not one particular thing. But what we do think will be incredibly helpful is if the department could pull it together into a proper resourcing strategy that was clear, A, about where they needed to get to, and B, how it was all going to be funded.
Super insightful, thank you. I'm going to hand over with that to Sasha to ask you his question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thea. Thank you so much. Victoria, can I just ask, you've talked a lot about what's in there. What's your biggest disappointment about the proposed bill and what's missing?
Okay. My biggest disappointment. It is for the profession, but actually one for me personally, because as I approach my 7th year anniversary in this job, one of the biggest questions I had, and I say this as someone who started their career in local government, when I came into this job at the RTPI was, where have all the chief planning officers gone? Because when I started my career in the 1990s, the chief planner that I looked up to sat at the top table of local government, was a mover and shaker, helped call the deals, very clear with developers what they wanted, what they didn't want. And it was a really strong role. And then I went off to consultancy, and then I went to work for Mayors of London, came back into this role, brought me very close to planning 25 years later. And I asked the question. And our research at the Royal Town Planning Institute showed most of them had been shunted down a level 2 or 3. Some had even had the departments broken up, so that you had regulatory stuff sat over with environmental services and planned was somewhere else. And all of this has led to a bit of a chaotic approach to planning in certain areas that hasn't helped drive that inward investment. Now, we've moved forward from that, but the job's not done yet, and the job won't be done until we've got that statutory chief planning officer, Sasha. So, I've pinned my tail to the donkey there very, very publicly. That is something that I think is really important, because if we get that in statute, it's not just important for this government's growth strategy, that's important for decades to come. So that's the thing I'm most disappointed with. But you can see I'm not crying. I don't look sad, because I'm very optimistic about all of this. We've got it so far, and I think we'll get it. I think we'll finish the job.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more with your sentiments. I'm sure Paul will, those of us who have been doing planning for too long.
And I think we'd all be disappointed if you were looking sad while on a week-long jolly in France. But
I trust it's not a jolly. I've nearly lost my voice, and it's not through passing, through talking.
Charlie, over to you.
Thanks, Thea, and hi again, Victoria. I wanted to ask about neighbourhood planning. As we know, and Paul has explained, the bill introduces strategic planning at a sub-regional level, and that in turn complements the tightening up of planning at a national level, which we've seen through the reintroduction of mandatory targets and the other changes to the MPPF in December. But neighbourhood planning is left untouched, including the lack of any requirement in the basic conditions for neighbourhood plans to be in conformity with national policy. They have to have regard to it, but they can say we have regard to it, we don't much like it. Do you think this risks leaving a loophole for well-organised local communities to undermine the more central-led and regional-led growth agenda?
Well, I mean, I think that just taking a step back, the concept of neighbourhood plans is always been sort of one that we have welcomed. Getting the community more involved and getting them with some skin in the game and helping to shape things. It's that is not something that we've disagreed with or has thought it's a bad idea. I think what you've got here, and obviously I can speak openly because I don't work for politicians, I work for members. I think that there has been such rapid change and a desire for the government to move forward so quickly. I suspect there's a couple of blind spots that in an ideal world they would have got to, but just ran out of time to meet this deadline. That's my suspicion here. So it doesn't mean that they can't come back and have another look at that. And I think for the reasons that you've sort of set out there is a choreography of plans. There is meant to be a layering of how things work. And if part of it isn't still quite working yet, I'm sure that the department will get to it and have a look at it. So I won't go so far as to say it's putting anything in danger or jeopardy. But I do think it probably is something that needs a little bit of TLC, may have been a blind spot in the extraordinary work the department have done, which is nothing short of Herculean, I should say. It is an awful lot that they've done quickly. I take the point that was made earlier. We could have perhaps gone quicker. I'm not sure whether they could have done. There's a lot of work been done really quickly. I'm not going to speak for the department because I'm not them. But what I will say is I suspect they will want to have another look at it because they won't want anything sort of getting in the way of this new framework that has been established.
Very, very, very true. Thank you for that. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, to borrow, and a huge amount of work's on it. You never know what amendments might be proposed at various stages of its progress through the House.
Who could say? You don't know any lords, do you?
Don't know. Do you know any? Back to you, Thea.
Thanks. And I'm straight over to Paul, please, for your question.
Yeah, not with any ability in terms of knowledge of Lords, I have to say. Love you to bits, Charlie. And Victoria, I'm interested in the extent to which you think these reforms will help to try and de-escalate some of the hostility that we encounter all the time, both barristers in terms of appeals and also officers and consultants. To what extent will this help to alleviate that? And in particular, is there a need to provide some degree of greater assistance to prevent the situation of us having repeated allocations at appeal? What can we do, and will this help?
Well, I mean, I'm obviously in an environment here that's been very optimistic all week, so I am feeling optimistic. Ask me again in a couple of months. Who knows? I do feel it helps, and I'll tell you why. Often people, perhaps they don't always like sort of where they're guessing with it, but what they really want is a clear direction of travel, a clear narrative, and somebody to sort of lead the way. And I think what you've got at the moment is a very clear direction of travel and a clear narrative coming out of government, helped by the fact that, for example, housing numbers became the 6th surprise mission in the autumn. And what that does is, you alluded to it earlier, there's been some decisions. There's decisions coming quite quickly. There is a change in the temperature. There's a change in the tone of the discussion. Whether you agree with the tone of discussion or not, one thing is for clear. This government, in my impression, is just getting going in terms of the speed of which they want to move things forward and get on with the business of delivering infrastructure, of delivering homes and making people's lives better. So I just think there is a clear mandate that they feel they have. They are getting on with it. Will that make it better? I think it makes it clearer. And I think some of the tensions before is because there was a bit of unclarity and people weren't really sure where they were going on bits and pieces, and there were lots of delays and decisions parked. And so I think having clarity of direction, even if you don't necessarily agree with the direction, at least everybody knows where they stand. At least there's a basis for a conversation about how we move forward. So I am feeling optimistic that it will help, because there is a clear path that has been set and the ship is set sail. Sorry to take an example of where I am. There's a lot of ships down here, but it is taking sail and it's going. And it very much seems to me that there is an opportunity, and I've said this publicly down here when I was asked about it, for the profession to embrace the change and be part of the change and influence it for good. Because I think if you don't do that, I think increasingly you'll be waving from the shore as the ship keeps going. So that's the impression I get, that there is an opportunity, or a golden opportunity, for the profession, for the built environment in its broadest sense, to make the best of this new framework. There will be lots of secondary legislation that comes through. Engage with it, make the most of it. And as I've said very publicly here also, opportunities like this, they only come across every sort of 12 to 15 years is a big shake-up. So now's the time to sort of get involved with the shake-up. It might not happen for another 15 years. So yes, again, excuse me if I'm being a bit flippant, but I have also said this to countless people, the moaning needs to stop now. Okay, so the government's given lots of opportunities here to change the conversation. You need to get on with it. And the change of the focus of the conversation down here is about delivery now. So let's stop moaning. It may not be perfect, but let's make the most of the opportunity. Let's go for it. There's lots of problems to solve, whether it's energy, whether it's homelessness, climate, nature. All of this touches all of that. And, so let's make the most of the opportunity. May not be perfect, but I don't think perfect will ever come. So we just got to get on with it.
No, I strongly agree, Victoria. And the notion of demonising top-down figures as being inimical, actually, it's leadership. It's providing strategic planning at the right level. And that's what principles of subsidiarity are about. So I strongly agree with you. This is leadership, not some sort of imposition of requirements on parties. Sorry, thank you, Thea. You didn't need my answer.
Thank you very much. And Chris, over to you. No moaning allowed. Can you match Victoria's positivity?
Yeah, well, amen to that. No more moaning. So let's not have people saying we can't do 1.5 million. Yes, we can. Okay. People just need to get with it. People need to realise that is what is to be achieved. Government has done more than any of us imagine. My question is about the extent to which you feel you're being listened to, because I think a lot of people felt that professional planners and your organisation were just not really listened to with the last government. People have commented about the ring fencing. How many times was it asked to ring fence the increases? I shared a platform in the House of Commons with Michael Gove, who absolutely was not prepared to do that. He is the reason why they would not do that towards the latter stages. Now we've got a new government and they're going to ring fence this. John Akers said that neighbourhood planning and the amount of power given to local people was dumbing down, your ex-president, dumbing down the planning profession. Now we see a system where professional planners are being respected so much that schemes of up to 100 houses, 100 units, will be delegated so that professional planners make the decision. You don't need, as Paul said, endless democratisation of every single process. So to what extent do you think the new government is listening to the professionals and the people who know how it works?
I think they have listened and they are listening. And, that's been very clear to me from not just ministers, but from sectors of state. So I have been in this job now for nearly 7 years. Up until December, I didn't meet with my RTPI hat on. I didn't meet a single secretary of state. It was always speak to the minister. And that's fine because the minister is very powerful, very influential. But since December, I've now spoken to the minister, but I've also spoken to 3 secretaries of state. So we're not just being listened to. This is a cross-departmental mobilisation. Thank you, number 10, for making the housing number a 6th milestone. That then gets you in with the Cabinet Office very interested, and that then mobilises other secretaries of state, including business. And Jonathan Reynolds has said to me down the line, I'm listening. So it's not just MHCLG who are listening. They're all listening because this target is a cross-governmental target. It helps drive the growth agenda. And I can see some of the comments here, when it's not going to please everybody, what I'm saying. But what I will say to you, if you're our members, if you're not, please join. For the first time since I've been in this job, we really are being listened to. And that's why I say the moaning has to stop, because we are being listened to. So let's make the most of the opportunity. May not be perfect for all of you, but we are being listened to. We have got things in this legislation, in the bill so far, that there's going to be a process. There's an opportunity for us to influence it further before it becomes an act. So I feel that it has been a real moment for the profession to be properly listened to. I think we should all just take a moment to acknowledge that. Yes, of course, there'll be lots going on still, lots more to do. The job's not done. It'll never be done. But for the first time in a long time, we have been listened to. There is a recognition that planning is important. There is investment going into it. Let's take a moment to be grateful for that and make the most of it.
Terrific answer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. You've absolutely ignited the webinar chat. Big daily insights and responses. So thanks so much for joining us, and see you again in 5 years.
Thank you very much.
Victoria, thank you for me too. Really fascinating discussion. The message I get away from this is, amongst other things, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Let's celebrate the direction of travel of this. And hope that direction will continue. Thank you, Victoria. You're flying the flag for the planning industry in Cannes at MIPIM this week. You've been flying it domestically in all jurisdictions with RTPI, including Scotland, of course, and continue to do so, which I'm sure all members of the profession will be extremely grateful for all you've done and continue to do. And it's great that you're getting that traction at the top level in government. That's all for now from us. We will be back in 2 weeks' time on the 27th. Can I finally remind you and really reiterate, for reasons I hope are fairly obvious, that we do encourage you this week to make a donation either to St John's Hospice, Lancaster, and or to Bowel Council UK in memory of our great friend Jonathan. Good night.